In 1970, when our group of Pakistani students and workers was preparing to return to Pakistan to explore the political landscape and decide what to do, we came in touch with the Balochistan movement. And after lengthy discussions, we came to the conclusion that this was a good starting point or entry to do the things we wanted to do. I was charged with arranging not only the training of people who were going back in various skills like machining, photography and so on, but also the responsibility to ensure that they arrived safely at the other end. Now, our first batch left in 1970 and they trained somewhere in Jordan with the Palestinians and became part of the resistance to the Jordanian army coming down hard on the Palestinians after Black September. So we fought on the side of the Palestinians. Fortunately, no one was killed or injured amongst us, but ironically, we were fighting on the side of the Palestinians, and a certain Brigadier Ziaul Haq was commanding the armoured brigade that had been sent by Pakistan as a Praetorian guard for King Hussein, and he was shelling the Palestinian refugee camps in Amman while we were fighting against the Jordanian army. After that, having sent batches back in 1971, October in fact, I returned to Pakistan with two comrades. We came by road. In those days it was still possible to drive from the UK to Pakistan. We travelled through a lot of Europe, Germany, West Germany at that time, France, Italy, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, sorry, I'm not going in the right sequence, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, and then finally Pakistan.
How long was this journey?
3 weeks. We had two drivers and one passenger, so we took turns driving. We hardly had any money, so we stopped in either places where there were friends, we stopped with them, and where we didn't have friends, we stayed in youth hostels, which you might know are a very cheap form of stay. When we arrived back in Pakistan, we went and met, obviously, our comrades. I was given the task to go up north and look into certain things, like, how to set up a machine shop and, what to do and so on. On my way, I stopped in Lahore, saw my family, and ran into a woman who was to have a very big part in my life from there on. Her name is Ghazala, she's my wife. When I first met her, it was in very strange circumstances because our friends were getting married and they were having a reception in the Ambassador Hotel on Davis Road. So I was there with a friend and we were getting bored, so we decided to go down to the basement where in those days Ambassador had a bar to spend some time. And when we were getting into the lift, this whole gaggle of women came out. And one of them was Salima Hashmi, who was a very close friend. And she got very curious about who this creature was, me, because I was looking very strange in those days. I'd shaved my head before I left England. So I had a 3-week growth of stubble on my head, which made me look, along with my beard, both were black at that time, exactly like a gollywog. I was wearing tight black jeans and white socks and a black sweater. So this was a rather unusual, shall we say, combination for Lahore, I imagine. So she got curious and she asked Salima, who's this guy? She said, don't you know? It's Rashi. They all call me Rashi. Rashi? Rashi who? So she explained who. Salima and her family and her husband Shoaib Hashmi and his family I have known since childhood. They're friends. We've been in and out of each other's houses all our lives. They didn't always live in Model Town. They first lived in Muzang. I've known them since then. So old and close friends, and I might add that both Shoaib and Salima were in England for some time, and so we met there also. In fact, Faiz Saab used to visit and stay with Salima and Shoaib, and I met him 2 or 3 times in England as well. In fact, on one occasion we invited him because we were doing in a coffee bar in Earl's Court called the Troubadour film shows and lectures in the basement. It was a left-wing coffee bar. So we invited Faiz Saab to one of these sessions, and the great man came. He was so modest. I mean, you know, we were young people, but he was so encouraging and so modest that he actually took the time out to come there, sat through the film and the lecture, joined us for coffee upstairs afterwards, and of course once he started talking, everybody in the coffee bar congregated around us and wanted to hear what he had to say when they found out who he was. Anyway, so Salima is an old friend, and she said, "That's Rashed." So who's Rashed? Then Rashed was explained who he is, you know, family, this, that, background, etc. I didn't see her again for some time, but when I returned from up north, I stopped in Islamabad because a cousin of mine was getting married. And I remember Salman Taseer, the late governor who was assassinated, was also an old friend. Families knew each other, etc. He was actually my elder brother Shahid's class fellow, and we had actually shared a flat in London, number of boys, you know, so we were friends. I bumped into him at this marriage, and again we were getting bored. You know, marriages are boring if you're attending. So we decided to go off to the London bookshop to look at some books. And while we were browsing there, I saw Ghazala again, who was there with her brother and cousins. They had just returned from a trip to Murray to watch the snowfall. This must be January, February sometime. So although, you know, things were tough for me, the work was very hard, there was no money, we were in dire poverty, I think it was harder on Ghazala because she was a new entrant into the movement, and I think there was some element of reservation about her amongst colleagues, amongst comrades, which took a long time to allay. And then we decided that you know, the best thing would be if she were to get a job and earn some money, because we were literally flat. So she got a job in PTV as a designer, and on her princely salary of I think 750 rupees at that time, we survived. This is 72 I'm talking about. As I say, we had no money. We ate and lived very, very frugally, and whatever change, coins we accumulated were deposited when coming or going into a big glass jar. And when we had enough coins in it, we used to take them out and go out and have a treat. And what was the treat? A film, and we were very fond of Pakola's ice cream soda. So we'd have an ice cream soda and film, and that was an outing for us, you know. So you can imagine what the situation was. She didn't know all of it when she entered it. She discovered slowly. She was the kind of person who, when she commits to something, you know, it's serious. So she was committed. She would not have otherwise married me and come with me. It was a bit of a leap in the dark for her, which is what I tried to point out in my defense. But she wouldn't have any discouragement. She was decided. It was very tough for her. She worked. She was on the periphery of the movement. She took initiatives on her own, encouraged by me, to find other people to induct into the movement, recruit, etc., so on and so forth. So I do not think we can fault her for her commitment to the movement, but the movement had certain problems of its own. For a start, as I had said earlier, we were going into a tribal society, a culture very different from what we were familiar with and which we had to acquire, learn and integrate with. And one of the problems in that tribal society was that the role of women was traditional and peripheral. And so inducting a city woman into that environment, placing her center stage, posed certain difficulties. And so we were told to stay in the city, Karachi, and work from there. Now, one of the difficulties that she encountered was my frequent absence. The work required me to be absent from home and absent from Karachi for long stretches and frequent stretches. Not long stretches, but days on end and frequently. And so it was lonely too. I think what helped was that she had family in Karachi, her chacha's home, and his daughters were like sisters to her. They'd grown up together. So that was a support system for her, which I think helped greatly. But other than that, it was a lonely, tough existence. Nobody knew what I was doing. Even Ghazala's family didn't know what I was doing. She was sworn to secrecy. The nature of the work was still underground, and it remained underground for a long time. The armed struggle had not yet broken out. The political situation in the country was as follows. I was here when the war in December on the Western Front started, and I was here. In fact, that lunch that I was talking about at Shehrazad Alam's was on December 16th, the day that Dhaka fell. In fact, when I entered the house, I came from the gate shouting at the top of my voice, "Dhaka has fallen, Dhaka has fallen." So, that is the context. Now, after the fall of Dhaka and the breaking away of East Pakistan, Bhutto Saab came to power with the help of a dissident group of generals who overthrew Yahya and installed Bhutto as possibly the only popular politician who could, manage a Pakistan that seemed to be in pieces. And hence Mr. Bhutto's slogan of Naya Pakistan, which Imran has now taken over. Naya Pakistan was basically that Jinnah's Pakistan was gone. One wing had broken away. The 1947 Pakistan was over. So what was it going to be replaced with in what was left of Pakistan, which was essentially West Pakistan? It was, according to him, a Naya Pakistan. Now, he had a number of problems on his plate. First and foremost, he had to negotiate with India to readjust the changes that had taken place on the border and on the boundary in Kashmir, etc. Territory had changed hands on both sides. So readjustments back to where everybody was before the war, and of course negotiate the release of the 90,000 prisoners of war that India was holding. So he went to Simla to do that in April 72. And domestically, he had a need to bring things together, bring people together, bring the political forces together, which he did by negotiating with the main opposition parties, which were National Awami Party and the Jamiyat-e-Ulama Islam, which was led at that time by Maulana Fazl's father, Mufti Mahmud. NAP and JUI had accumulated most of the provincial seats, or the majority of the provincial seats, in what was then NWFP in Balochistan. And so Bhutto Saab negotiated with them, allowed them to form their governments there, gave them their own governors, which was unprecedented, because normally governors are the representatives of the centre. And of course, his People's Party was in power in Punjab and Sindh, and he was in power at the national level. Under that interim constitution that he negotiated with the opposition in April 72, he became president. And it was not till August 14th, 1973, when the 73 constitution was promulgated, that he then became prime minister. Now, during this period, from April 72 to August 73, some very serious developments took place in the country. News of these tactics, when it filtered out, particularly our first few clashes, aroused a firestorm in the country. The issue was taken up in the National Assembly, and amidst cries for revenge, Mr. Bhutto upped the ante in terms of the military crackdown that he had initiated in Balochistan. More troops were sent. Helicopter gunships were borrowed from the Shah of Iran. When they strafed us, we discovered their empty shells with Iranian markings, so it was clear. And the reason why the Shah was interested in quelling the Baloch resistance, because he had a problem on his hands with his own Baloch. Iranian Balochistan had been in ferment for a long time, and he was afraid that the nationalist infection would travel into Iranian Balochistan and quite possibly create problems for him. So he wanted to nip the mischief in the bud, so to speak, by helping Mr. Bhutto. Now that war went on from 1973 till 1977. And the way it played out was that because the guerrillas were difficult to find and pin down and exterminate, the military, as militaries tend to do in any counterinsurgency campaign, took it out on the people. So the tribes came under attack. And when families came under attack, in particular households, a lot of refugees were created who fled to Afghanistan for safety. The Afghan government at that time was Sardar Daud, who, as I've said before, was a Pashtun nationalist and expected to support such things. Well, all he could do was provide our refugees with the barest minimum food, shelter, camps, tents, and minimal care. They did what they could. This was, the limitation of capacity and resources rather than any unwillingness, shall we say. So a lot of families fled. On the battlefield, when we started fighting, there were 12 areas where resistance was taking place all over Balochistan, and we were on one front. And on our front too, there were 8 groups operating independently, and we were one of them. But gradually, as the war unfolded, the traditional tribal resistance, which had not prepared for a protracted war, they had no logistics, they had no organization of that sort, ran into difficulties. Many of them were killed, exterminated, some fled to Afghanistan. The 8 groups in our area eventually came under our command because we were the most effective.
Which area were you?
Murree area. But of course we had links with other groups in other areas and the cities. Between 73 and 77, the army lost 3,500 killed and about 6,500 injured. Now, to put it in perspective, this was a bigger toll than in all the wars that Pakistan has fought against India. Try to imagine what that means. So effective, I would say yes. With very limited resources, let me tell you. Bare subsistence. Because from our point of view, the struggle had come upon us prematurely. Had we had more time, I think we would have been better prepared. But sometimes, best laid plans. So, strategically, I think, given the nature of guerrilla warfare, it's like the flea nibbling away. And the idea is that because there's an unequal relationship of power between the two sides, first and foremost the guerrillas have to survive. Survival is supreme. And along with survival, they have to, as I said, nibble away and create a situation where not only tactically but also strategically the army that is trying to crush you is fought to a strategic stalemate, or becomes a kind of defensive situation. And only when you acquire the necessary strength, military and logistical and resources, can you then go on the offensive and hope to win. Now, this war between 73 and 77, I would say, began with the first phase, which is survival, but by 77 had fought the army virtually to a standstill. In July 77, when Mr. Bhutto was overthrown by General Zia-ul-Haq in a military coup, the military had virtually stopped fighting. They were sitting in their camps, inactive, not proactive, marginal patrolling, and trying to just stay safe, and the guerrillas had the initiative, and therefore it expanded the territory that they could control or influence.
Mr. Bhutto की हुकूमत ख़त्म हो चुकी है, सारे मुल्क में माशाल्लाह नाफिज कर दिया गया है, कौमी और सूबाई असम्बलियाँ तोड़ दी गई हैं, सूबाई गवर्नर और वजीर हटा दिए गए हैं, अलबत्ता आइन को मनसूख नहीं किया गया है, इसके बाद हिस्सों पर अमल दरामद रोक लिया गया है.
And after Mr. Bhutto's overthrow, I think General Zia-ul-Haq, ironically, the commander-in-chief of the army, the chief of army staff, who, when Bhutto was negotiating in 1977 with the PNA, the opposition that had launched an agitation against alleged rigging in the 77 elections, the big stumbling block in coming to an agreement between the two sides was the insistence of the military, and General Zia gave the meeting a briefing on it. The reluctance of the military to concede the demands of the Baloch and to end the conflict there. And what were those demands? Basically, the army should withdraw to barracks, no retaliatory actions against those who fought in the resistance, release of prisoners. Many people were in prison and many of them had been tortured. Some had been killed, including some of our comrades. And compensation to the people for loss of life, loss of livestock, agricultural losses, homes, whatever was destroyed in the war. Now, General Zia, in spite of his resistance and in spite of his objection to any concession to Balochistan during the negotiations with the PNA, once he came to power, he had his hands full with Mr. Bhutto and the PPP. His fear was that, initially he was very respectful of Mr. Bhutto even after overthrowing him, but as time went by, and particularly after Mr. Bhutto was released for a brief period, he realized that Bhutto, being by reputation a vengeful person, would not spare him if he came back to power. And so it became a question of around whose neck the noose would be tightened, Zia or Bhutto. Now, given this situation, he decided to sue for peace with the Baloch. Irony of ironies. And so they did negotiate. The leadership, I forgot to tell you, was in Hyderabad jail. Why were they there? They were there because in 1975, amidst the crackdown, the intelligence and police authorities managed to lay their hands on parts of our urban organization, which was underground. They picked up some people and they chased some people. And I was one of the ones they chased, and I escaped them by the skin of my teeth and went underground. That's another story, which I'll come to. In 1975, I and my friend Najib Sethi, who were together in Karachi, received a message from a comrade who had been picked up in Quetta. And apparently he had been in their grasp for at least a month and was very badly tortured. Now, he was a very committed comrade. I don't think he told them much, and perhaps what he told them was of little value. The instructions to us were, if we were arrested, every human being has a breaking point. This is what the torturers know, which is why they persist with torture. Our instructions were, hold out for 24 hours. After 24 hours, tell them all you know. Why? Because if you are arrested, within 24 hours, all the information you have will become redundant, because we'll change everything. We had plans for that. But this friend couldn't get news to us about his arrest for 1 month. And so he was very badly tortured. And after 1 month, he managed somehow to sneak out a message to us that I'm here being tortured and asked for information. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. Please take necessary steps, which we did.
Which one?
Well, for a start, Najm Sethi and I were not sleeping at home. And we were not sleeping in the same place every night. And we were armed in case something happened. So this went on for about a month or two. And then Sethi had landed under the aegis of a consultancy that he had set up, which was a means to earn some money and also a front. He got a contract for the redevelopment of Kolu Valley, which is the heart of Murree area. And so he was invited up there for a survey and discussions. Now this was a war zone, don't forget. He and another friend, Azhar Karim, who was working with him on this, decided to go up there, against my advice and over my objections. I told them that this was a very dangerous moment. We were under pressure. There was a possibility that the investigation that was going on, now that they had cracked part of the urban organization in Quetta, that eventually it would lead to us. And the problem was that in those days, there were no mobile phones. So if you are up there in the Murree area, I won't even be able to reach you. So then, after their insistence, we agreed that they would get to Quetta from where they were traveling with the army by helicopter to Murree area. There was no other way to get up there because it was a war zone. That they would arrange and leave me a number in Quetta to call in case something went wrong, a landline number. Of course, in their overconfidence, they didn't do that. So they were now in Murree area, beyond our reach and in the sort of grasp of the army. At that point, what I had predicted happened. By following various leads and trails and by gathering some information, they managed to get to me without knowing that they were getting to me, in the sense. Everyone in the party had a pseudonym, a party name. I was known only by my pseudonym. People didn't know my real name. So the guy who fingered me didn't know my real name. But the point of contact was a motor workshop that I had set up in Karachi. And so he pointed them in that direction. They arrived. I wasn't there. Then one day when I was coming back to Karachi from somewhere, the arrangement was that I would call home first. And Ghazala would tell me if the coast was clear. And then I would come home. I told you we were taking precautions. So one day when I came back and I called her, she said, well, there was a call from the police and they wanted to talk to you. I said, what did they say? She said, they didn't say very much. They just said they wanted to talk to you. They've left a number. I said, all right. So I called them. They said, you know, we have so and so in our custody, and he's told us that his contact is at this workshop that you own, apparently, that you run, and we'd like to talk to you about it. Do you know this gentleman? I said, not offhand, but then, you know, I have so many customers. Possibly he's a customer. I might have to look up my records to see, but it doesn't ring any bells, his name. I knew who it was, by the way. I think they were not convinced. And I saw that now I consulted with comrades, with the party, and we decided that, you know, I should get out of the way for a while. Especially since Sethi and this friend, Azhar Karim, were up there with the army. We should try to delay as much as possible to give them a chance to get out, because we couldn't get any message to them. So we decided that I, Ghazala, and my son Taimur, who was all of 6 months old, should fly to Lahore and to my parents' home, because I told you my father was, after all, a prominent person. We felt that we would be reasonably safe there. Of course, the parents didn't know. And buy time for our friends up there to get out. So we flew to Lahore. And within a couple of days, I think, a cousin of my father's who'd served as a magistrate, very close to police and intelligence and these kind of people, he rang my father one day to say that, you know, police are looking for Rashed, and apparently they spoke to him in Karachi, but now he's no longer available. Have you any idea where he is? So my father said, he's here. When did he arrive? 2 days ago. Okay, he said, so they would like to talk to him. What about? There's this guy, and we've been interrogating him. They've been interrogating him about this bomb blast on a PIA plane in Islamabad. What happened was, there was a plane on the tarmac, and there was an explosion in it. No passengers, fortunately, at the time. So, you know, the plane was damaged, no loss of life. So they were investigating that. And this gentleman, the same one who had fingered me, was being interrogated on this. And so they wanted to see me. So my father asked me, this is what I'm being told, what is this about? I told them in Karachi that I don't know this gentleman, but he could be one of my customers. But then I did check my record. I didn't find any record of him, so I don't know who he is. And why he's mentioning that workshop that I run. Maybe he knows somebody who used to meet him there. I don't know. I have no idea. So with this story, we go to my uncle's house, my father's cousin. I remember, it was on Empress Road. And these two SPs arrived to talk to me in the presence of my father and my uncle. And they went through the routine questioning me, and I went through the routine of saying, I don't know. I could see they were not convinced. And I realized that now the trap was closing around me. I delayed it as much as I could. So then I got a call from Islamabad, police, wanting to talk to me. I said, fine, actually I'm coming to Islamabad. So why don't I come and see you? No, I have to go back a bit. I consulted with the party, and we decided that I had to go underground. And now there was no choice. And those guys were stuck up there. Nothing could be done, but if they got hold of me, then they would be gone too. You know, we'd all be gone. So I was asked to go underground. So I tried to go underground in Lahore. I went to the Punjab University, old campus, and tried to disappear from there. But they were on to me, and they followed me And on the campus, they were following me too, in a very crude and obvious manner. You know, there was a guy, big guy with a big moustache, was staring at me, you know, as though he wanted to kill me. I realized it's so stupid, you know. I mean, they gave themselves away. So I abandoned that plan. I couldn't. And then I made another plan. And this plan was obviously with the help of some comrades. And I told them, I'm coming to Islamabad, I'll come and see you. So on the flight, when I was going to Islamabad, there were a couple of their guys on the flight behind me. I saw them. And when we arrived at the airport, there was a van and some guys standing there I could see. So I went out the back way and disappeared. I had a pre-arranged rendezvous. I was picked up and I vanished. Now the next morning I'm supposed to appear in the FIA office to talk to the police. And I told them I'd be there by around 9. Around 11, they called my father. We're waiting for him, he hasn't come. My father called my brother who lived in Islamabad. He said, I don't know where he is. So of course, the S hit the fan, as they say. Suddenly they realized, this guy has given us the slip. Those two SPs who'd interrogated me, I'm told, were kicking themselves because they were demoted as a result. For mucking up the whole operation. Anyway, I disappeared. They then raided in Karachi Sethi's office and residence. And there they captured our passports. And they picked up Sethi and Azhar Karim up there and transported them to Quetta, blindfolded in a helicopter, and they went through hell. They put out a bulletin, mounted possibly the biggest manhunt in Pakistan's history. Airports, railway stations, bus stations, seaports. That photograph was circulated from my passport. This man is wanted. And then, of course, having captured Sethi, he did what he had been instructed to do, which is held out for as long as he could, and then told him whatever he knew, because by then he knew he'd be out of date. I went underground and then traveled back to my home base in southern Pakistan, and from there began to put together the shattered pieces of the organization. Difficulty I had was who to trust, because once such a crackdown penetrates into your ranks, they turn people, either through torture or some other means, some bait, and human beings are human beings. Some are turned. So you didn't know who to trust. So I had to be very careful. I had left them with my parents because I knew they would be safest there. It was not easy leaving them, believe me. And it was not easy for them. So although I had installed Ghazala and 6-month-old Taimur with my parents thinking they would be safe there, she did go through a very tough time. She was followed. She was constantly subjected to telephone calls, some obnoxious, threatening, others abusive. This went on for a little while, and then after a few months, she decided to move to Islamabad, got a job in PTV there, had herself transferred there, and lived in Islamabad for a good many years. Now, the situation, as I say, was very difficult for me, communicating with them, with the rest of my party comrades, because, as I said, it became difficult to know who to trust and who had been turned. So I had to be very, very careful. without immodesty, possibly if I had not survived underground, then movement would have been. It was already in great difficulties because the shattering of the organization meant logistics went up the spout, and no guerrilla war can be fought without logistics. So I had to put all that together again, and if we had little resources before, we had none now. The comrades in the mountains were complaining, and then the situation was conveyed to them, or they found out. So it became a situation of critical survival. And what the leadership said to the people still in the area who were supporting the guerrillas was, when you cook your meal and when you prepare your bread, put one fistful of flour aside for the party. And every household did that. And that's how they survived until we got reorganized. Now, this tells you the relationship between the guerrillas and the people. And no guerrilla war can succeed unless it has the sea of the people to fish in like swim in like fish. That is the relationship. It's like lips and teeth,
What was your pseudonym while you were working on
Arif, which I changed later when I went underground. But there were, names like Ali, Arif, short names.
given a name?
No, we chose it and the party agreed, that's it. I mean, it wasn't a big ceremony or anything. Just a functional thing, because the risk of revealing your real identity was very great, even if you trusted your comrades. As I said, human beings have limits. We all knew that. We organized on the basis of that, because no matter how committed a person and how much integrity they have, when the torturers get to you, it's not easy. So you cannot blame anyone for breaking down. You have to plan for it. In fact, you accept it as inevitable sooner or later, and you make plans accordingly. This is what we did. Now, it was very tough. I had to virtually live in isolation for days, weeks, months on end, with very occasional visits from couriers to whom I would give instructions or who would bring me news, or both. I could not move around freely. If I had to move, it had to be in disguise and with all the precautions possible. Melt into the background, the populace, and so on and so forth. It was not easy, as I said. There were moments of great depression. You had to struggle against that. You were alone a lot, and always apprehensive of being caught, possibly killed. So, it's not the kind of situation where you are necessarily cheerful all the time, if you know what I mean. But it didn't discourage me. If anything, I think it increased my determination to survive personally and to rebuild the organization so the war could go on.
After the attempt to crack down on you and to catch you, did your wife discourage you?
Not at all. She was obviously very upset at my leaving, but she never discouraged me. She stood by me through this very difficult period, right to the end. And she looked after Taimur when I wasn't there. It was a partnership.